go for a little ride.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Jonathan Lee Rich's investigates. New bombshell information revealed in the Bryan Kohberger case. His defense just filed a motion, and they are claiming there's no DNA evidence that links Bryan Kohberger to any of the victims in his apartment, his office, his parents' home, and his vehicle, the white Hyundai Elantra. Bryan Kohberger, no evidence. What about the reports out there that saw Bryan cleaning his car inside and out after the murders happened, according to law enforcement sources? According to law enforcement sources.
Since Kohberger's arrest in Pennsylvania a week ago and the release of the probable cause document on his return to Idaho, we have learned more about the investigation into the quadruple murder. Law enforcement sources told CNN that the Hyundai Elantra that Kohberger was driving was cleaned from top to bottom by the suspect. During surveillance of his parents' in Pennsylvania home and Kohberger's movements, sources told the media outlet that the 28-year-old doctoral student was seen wearing surgical gloves. Law enforcement sources told CNN that the Hyundai Elantra that Kohberger was driving was cleaned from top to bottom.
New officials just released a handful of pictures of Kohberger's car that they confiscated after his arrest in Pennsylvania. It's definitely seen better days and could use, like a car wash at this point. Investigators apparently took the door panels off and covered the interior with a white dust or fluid, presumably used to find fingerprints or other forensic evidence. And remember, one of Bryan Kohberger's alibis before he confessed was that he was in this car all alone on a long drive with his cell phone turned off, looking at the moon and stars. Remember that? Well, prosecutors even said that Kohberger had cleaned this car so meticulously after the killings that he basically disassembled it, and they didn't find any DNA evidence in the car to link the killer to the house on King Road in Moscow. Well, prosecutors even said that Kohberger had cleaned this car so meticulously after the killings.
He said that car is a rolling crime scene. Would you agree with him on that?
Oh, yeah, 100%, definitely.
On August 14th, 2025, Idaho reporter Kevin Fixler sat down with Idaho State Police Detective Darren Gilbertson, one of the lead detectives in the Idaho College murders. And he set out to verify or debunk a lot of the talk that had happened around this case. The most telling statement that Gilbertson gave Fixler in this interview was about Bryan Kohberger's car and the rumors about Bryan Kohberger's car that have been circulating online and through the mainstream moron coverage of this case since the beginning. Namely, during overnight surveillance in the days leading up to his arrest, Kohberger was observed once, very late at night, walking in dark clothing around his parents' neighborhood. But reports that law enforcement witnessed him throwing trash away in his neighbor's garbage can were untrue, Gilbertson said. Reports that claim they saw Kohberger using bleach to clean his car, which he drove back to Pennsylvania with his father, also were false. I think that was online stuff, Gilbertson told the Statesman. We did not ever, through surveillance, see that or observe that at all. You thought you knew the story about Kohberger's car? Let me tell you, we don't know anything until now. Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And nothing gets me more excited than to do an investigative special for you especially a Saturday or Sunday investigative special. Now, I know from time to time I like to do videos where I do a lot of speculating on things like, what the play is in the case. Are all of the people that we see on the media now working together in some way? Is this all a plan? And those videos are interesting because I like to think outside of the box. But my favorite videos are the ones where I can get down into the nitty gritty, take new released information, bring it to life, and show the truth of the matter in the case, like I'm going to do in this video right here. Because over time, the reason I developed those theories about people and plans and things in motion is because I have gone through all of the documentation, seen all of the stories, and put together this thing from every direction I could possibly put it together from. And I remember after the plea deal, when documents started to become more available to us than prior. Before the plea deal, all we could put together were documents that were released through court hearings. Now we started to get actual documents, forensic reports, police reports, released video, witness statements. The most telling, though, in my humble opinion, that really helped me to develop a lot of the theories that I come up with came from the 2,600 pages of forensic documents that were released. Because as I began to go through and break those down, something became clear to me. They didn't have any evidence against Bryan Kohberger of this crime. As we go through and we start looking at all of the evidence tested in the house, and I see over and over again, Bryan Kohberger is excluded. Bryan Kohberger is excluded. Here's a bloody fingerprint. Bryan Kohberger is excluded from it. Here's blood on a handrail. Bryan Kohberger is excluded from it. Here's blood on a glove. Bryan Kohberger is excluded from it. Here's blood in a mixture on the back of the knife sheath. Bryan Kohberger is excluded from it. And it made me start to wonder, how could this thing have not gone to trial? But then again, I remember the landscape at the time. It didn't go to trial because there was a media circus making up lies day in and day out. And then the ultimate release of information to a national news organization a couple of weeks before the trial, where they leaked out inadmissible evidence that wasn't really even evidence at all, but it was painted to look like negative evidence towards Bryan Kohberger. And now we know that a lot of that was factual lies as well. But no lies are more damaging than the lies that have been told since the beginning, such as the law enforcement. And it was always a source close to law enforcement source, prosecution source. Even though law enforcement and prosecution never came out and publicly said these things, but all of these organizations always quoted law enforcement sources close to the investigation to try to give credibility to the scoops that they were saying over and over and over. And I think it's interesting when the case is complete, supposedly, and lead detective Darren Gilbertson comes out along with lead detective Brett Payne, and they debunk all of those so-called rumors out there that news organizations cited as sources close to law enforcement. And the rumors that they started debunking, though, weren't the rumors that the community that believed Bryan Kohberger had been railroaded was saying. They debunked the rumors that the mainstream morons and all the guilters had said over and over and over, including they witnessed Kohberger put his trash in his neighbor's trash can in order to avoid detection. It was a lie. The most egregious, though, if that wasn't the most egregious, was, as I've shown you so far in this video, over and over and over, claiming that they had witnessed Kohberger cleaning his car from top to bottom with bleach. Darren Gilbertson absolutely dispelled that as an internet thing. No, it wasn't an internet thing, Gilbertson. It was mainstream morons that kept saying that and kept citing sources close to law enforcement. They need to tell us who these inaccurate sources are close to law enforcement, don't you think? But the switch from these morons from back then to right now is undeniably telling, because all we heard before those claims of, well, he cleaned his car out from top to bottom, was people like Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic specialist, telling us that the vehicle would be a rolling crime scene. It would be a petri dish of evidence. Now we have real documentation. I'm going to cover one of the new released expert reports that goes through and enlightens us on things that we did not know. This video will truly put you back in your seat if you believe Bryan Kohberger is guilty of this crime, because all the evidence in the case says otherwise. The main piece of evidence in this case was the car. That was the main piece of evidence that they tried to tie Bryan Kohberger to this crime, was the car. There was a car. It was obviously involved in this crime, but it wasn't Bryan Kohberger's, and it is now verifiably proven. They said it was Bryan Kohberger's car on video. The car that they said was his had fog lamps on three different videos. It had fog lamps. It wasn't his car. The CSLI proved that that wasn't his car as well, if the fog lamps weren't enough for you. They have video of a car at the Sunset Mart that does not line up with the times of the car that actually pulls through the neighborhood. There was so many white cars with no front license plates that looked like Hyundai Elantras rolling around that night. You can't even count them on both hands during the times of the crime. But the most important evidence is the evidence that they did not find once they took Kohberger's car apart. And what's even more telling is the evidence that they tried not to test as they were trying to determine if Kohberger's car was involved in the crime. Hold on to your hats, folks. This one is going to absolutely blow your hair back. And let me tell you, you may want to put on some shades like old Pav, because I don't want your eyeballs popping right out your head and landing on the floor. Let's roll.
There's a whole bounty of evidence that has yet to come forward. And, you know, one of the things I'm very interested in as a forensic science guy is that car. Because in my opinion, that car did not make it back to Idaho. More than likely, either working with Pennsylvania State Police or the FBI, that vehicle would have gone or has gone to an evidence processing location that has a garage, Jesse. And right now, they are taking this thing apart from stem to stern. Trust me on this. And they are going through that car, because I have contended all along that this car, obviously it's going to have Kohberger's DNA in it. You would expect that to be there. But if they get in that car and they find any DNA that's associated with these poor kids that were slaughtered in that house, this is important. My contention has been is that that car is a rolling crime scene in and of itself. And it has to be handled with kid gloves at this point. So they're going to take this thing apart piece by piece, and they're going to use every kind of technology that you can imagine on this thing, everything from alternative lighting to luminol or blue star or whatever they're using. They're going to take samples from all inside of this thing. The headliner's coming out, the seats are coming out, everything, the gear lever. They're going to take a look at the carpet, the substrata beneath the carpet, everything, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to clean one of these things, you are not going to escape what we're capable of doing in forensics and recovering molecular evidence.
This is, I think, really interesting, because the defense hired this consultant, and it's Dr. Ruth Ballard. And basically what I've ascertained from reading her report, she's a PhD in forensic biology and DNA consulting, but she also takes all aspects of the evidence and analyzes them into a final opinion. Now, she doesn't go as far as to dive into the fine details, like on the knife wounds, to see that there's more than one weapon and things of that nature. She literally just takes all of the police reports, the autopsy results, and all of the evidence from the crime scene, all the DNA that was tested through all the different labs, and then compiles her report. But what I think is interesting is you really dive into her report, and this was on January 23rd, 2025, and you get into the biology and DNA report. We learned some things that I really wasn't aware of. Independent review of DNA discovery and other relevant documents and files in the case of the State versus Kohberger. And she refers to reports from the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab, BODE, and cybergenetics. Now, as we go through this, she's also going to refer to the FBI's laboratory results as well. But it's this BODE lab that I never really focused on in this stuff. And that turns out to be really, really interesting. So she goes through and she gives like terms and abbreviations. And as we get down here, you see she mentions the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Crime Lab, BODE Lab, FBI Lab, and cybergenetics. In the BODE Lab, BODE Technology, Furnace Road in Lorton, Virginia. That's kind of neat. All right, so the ISPFS Crime Lab, she refers to blood testing. They start with testing it for, is it positive for blood with orthotolidine, DNA extraction, what type of equipment they use, the type of equipment they use for amplification, electrophoresis, gene mapping, and then finally probabilistic genotyping, which means matching from STR mix. Then the crime lab at the FBI, they focused on examination of hairs. They also did fibers, so it could be hair and fiber. But then this BODE lab, blood testing, presumptive phenolphthalein, human-specific hemotrace, DNA extraction, robot or manual, and then it's got hair in parentheses, elution volume, DNA extraction, what type of equipment that they're using for everything, just like the Idaho State Police Lab. And then finally, she mentioned cybergenetics that does the TrueLil probabilistic genotyping software, which was used on 13.1 Maddie Mogan. But it's this BODE lab that I think is really interesting. And then she talks about her methodology and how she used all of these laboratory reports from all of the labs, including the BODE lab, photographs from the crime scene, 3D analysis done by Matt Nodal, the FBI situational report dated 12/15/2022. I don't know what that is, but I would sure like to see it, because 12/15/2022 is right in there when they were in the midst of working on the IGG. So what the heck is this FBI situational report? I would love to see that, because that date is very interesting to me. That's the day after they killed Kopaka. Here's her rates. They're pretty extensive. And then she goes through and she recites the facts of the case, talks about she's aware of the car making passes. She goes through and talks about the wounds on the victims, evidence collecting and testing. And then once again, she mentions all the labs involved in this. And then she goes through and she starts compiling things. Like, for example, the ISPFS lab item 1. Now in this, she says there's an equivalent of 1,400 human cells found in 1.1. That's quite a bit, a lot more than I thought there was. I noticed that there is nothing in here about any other lab testing it, though, other than the ISPFS, which I think pretty much confirms that, they consumed all of the samples. We've never been able to just completely verify that. And then it talks about the other swabs from the sheath. And then she goes through and talks about every single lab item that was collected from the house, and every one that we identified was 1,000% correct. Not one more than we identified was tested, and everything that we had down to the results was always right, down to the 70-30, the 90-10, everything. And then as she goes through there, she points out the FBI lab, like hairs collected from a comforter, dissimilar to Kohberger. No other comparisons were made. That was on the third floor, I believe. F2 West bedroom. I mean, she goes through all of that, gets to the hair found near the bedroom, not Kohberger's. No comparisons were made. These were just the individual hairs that we had already identified throughout the pictures. She never talks about the clump of hair in Ethan's hand, which is interesting because upon closer view, I mean, you can see the hair here, but I never even noticed what Turvey was talking about over here. Look at this huge clump of hair. My goodness. I mean, we've been looking at these that go around like this, but on the wall, look at this. I mean, this is a lot of hair. I mean, this would be very noticeable. And look how straight it is. So, I mean, that certainly doesn't look like Ethan's hair, but look at how much it is. I mean, there would be somebody running around missing a lot of hair and apparently some scalp. Disgusting, but funny that I never hear anything about this hair mentioned in this report. His hand. Study table came back to Xana. All the stuff from Xana's room, it all came back to Xana. Nothing outside of Xana's room ever came back to Xana. 8911, Kaylee Maddie on all the samples taken in the living room and on the stairs, just like we always said. 3-person mixture on unknown male B. What's funny is she doesn't mention the L5. Nobody talks about the L5 fingerprint, the most investigative piece of evidence in this entire case, and it drives me nuts. She does talk about hair that's on the half wall that we actually identified through photographs. And anyway, she goes through everything, talks about all the hairs in the hands and in the bags, never mentions anything about the clump of hair. Stuff that was never tested, like the backpack and the gum wrappers and the beer cans. Beer pong table. Come back to Kaylee. Fingerprints on the windows. The glove. She puts a lot of information about the glove, how it's more than one contributor. How they could say 2 people's blood on a glove is not important. I don't know. That's just crazy to me. And then this is where it goes through and it talks about the hair being morphologically similar to Chapin's and so forth and so on. But where it gets really interesting is when we get down here. Mr. Kohberger's residence, Northeast Valley Road. So they go through Kohberger's apartment. The FBI analyzes 2 hairs found on a pillow, dissimilar to reference hairs of Chapin, Gonzalez, Knodel, and Mogan. So the FBI made sure that that wasn't victims. The vacuum cleaner, they found 13 hairs. None of them matched the victims. ISP, now this is where it gets interesting. The Idaho State Police Forensic Services lab item 99. 1 of 4 centimeter brown hairs. The original analysis done by the Idaho State Police Forensic Services crime lab found insufficient root material via microscopy for DNA testing. So the defense sent it off to the Bode lab, and then they couldn't find any DNA either. And then it keeps on going. They found stains on an uncased pillow. The ISP lab tested it. It just came back as Mr. Kohberger. ISP Lab 102, a sample from the top portion of a mattress protector that tested positive in a screening test for blood. Now, Kohberger is their number one suspect. They go through his apartment and they find blood on his mattress. The Idaho State Police lab does no DNA testing. No DNA testing was performed by the lab. So they go through Kohberger's apartment, find something, test it, and it tests positive for blood, and he's their number one suspect, but the lab chooses not to test it. So does that tell you right there that the lab had no intention of testing things because they knew that it wouldn't be from the crime? I mean, it's the only way I can even rationalize it in my mind. How are they not going to test blood in Kohberger's apartment? How are they not going to test it? I mean, if they really think he's the unaliver. Well, the defense sends it out to Bode Lab. That's the defense's lab for additional testing. Bode sampled 9 areas. In each case, there was DNA to produce a profile that was all single source, and it was all just Kohberger's blood. So the defense had to send the stuff out to the private lab to test it, to exclude the victims from being a contributor. The ISP lab finds blood and doesn't test it in Kohberger's apartment. Can you believe that? And then it goes on to talk about stains on the bottom portion of the mattress protector that tested positive for blood. The ISP lab did test those, and none of them came back to anybody but Kohberger. So they had to be going, oh no, because it didn't like Kohberger went home and cleaned his apartment to where all the evidence was gone, because they're finding hair and blood all over the thing. Just none of it matches the victims. But that's one thing. But when you get to the car,
this is important. My contention has been is that car is a rolling crime scene in and of itself.
That's something totally different, because all the mainstream idiots out there want to talk about Kohberger's car and say that he obviously didn't clean the outside of it because it was really dirty, but they want to say that because of his knowledge, he cleaned the inside of it, cleaned it so good that all the evidence was removed from the car. He was somehow that good. I mean, they literally took his car apart down to the parts and pieces trying to find evidence.
Well, prosecutors even said that Kohberger had cleaned this car so meticulously after the killings that he basically disassembled it, and they didn't find any DNA evidence in the car to link the killer to the house on King Road in Moscow.
But did they really? I mean, they absolutely took it apart down to the pieces looking for evidence. And this isn't Kohberger being this dirty. This is like for dusting for fingerprints and stuff. But even after taking his car all the way down to the fine pieces looking for evidence, did Kohberger really clean his car so well that they couldn't find any evidence? Absolutely freaking not. Because they found crap all over his car. They found 10 different human hairs in his car. Now remember, the FBI does all the hair testing. So in Mr. Kohberger's vehicle, the FBI lab items 65 through 75 were all hairs. They found 10 different hairs in his car. So how does he clean up his car for all of the evidence in the case, but leave the evidence that doesn't, point to his guilt? Give me a freaking break. This car wasn't cleaned. There was crap all over it. There just wasn't any evidence of the crime. And see, that's why I can look at stuff like this and everything that I've looked at, and I can clearly say, I believe Kohberger is innocent of the crime because I have looked at the evidence. Other people say I haven't been shown enough evidence to prove he's guilty. Well, I've been shown plenty of evidence to prove he isn't. So they took all those 10 hairs, and they were all dissimilar in reference hairs to the 4 victims in the case. So no, his car was not crystal clean. Kohberger didn't clean it up. It had hair all over it. It just wasn't from the victims. That isn't all. 4 different dog hairs were found in his car. Mr. Kohberger's vehicle, FBI lab items 67, 70, 71, and 74, all animal hairs, all tested by the FBI against Murphy, and none of the hairs belong to Murphy. So how does Kohberger clean his car of his hair and dog hairs? But I mean, how does he clean his car of all the victims' hairs and Murphy's hairs, but leave hairs that belong to likely him and his dog? Give me a break. Then on the seat cushion, you can see right here where they removed it, there was a spot that tested positive for blood from the seat cushion. Now, don't you think that the ISP lab, when they took his seat cushion off, found a spot on it, tested it, and it tested positive for blood, don't you think they were jumping up and down going, we found something, we got him right here?
They're going to take this thing apart piece by piece, and they're going to use every kind of technology that you can imagine on this thing, everything from alternative lighting to luminol or blue star or whatever they're using. They're going to take samples from all inside of this thing. The headliner's coming out, the seats are coming out, everything, the gear lever. They're going to take a look at the carpet, the substrata beneath the carpet, everything, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to clean one of these things, you are not going to escape what we're capable of doing in forensics and recovering molecular evidence.
Except when you look at it, it's lab item 104, cutting from the bottom of a seat cushion that tested positive in a screening test for blood by the lab. The lab did not perform any DNA testing on this item. So they go through, they jump up and down saying, we found blood, it tested positive, and then they don't test it? You think they really thought that Kohberger had the victim's blood in his car when they took it apart down to the pieces? They find blood and they don't test it? The defense had to submit it to their own lab. The lab made a DNA profile from the blood. It came back to Kohberger, not the victims. They knew it wasn't it wasn't the victim's blood. That's why they didn't test it. That's the only thing I can come up with. Wasn't all. Here's item 111.1. They took his floor mat, found trace material from it, got excited. We've got trace material from his floor mat. We got him. Oh, wait. Tested negative in a screening test for blood. Trace material was collected, but it was not tested by the lab. Well, it was trace material. It just didn't test positive for blood. So what was it? Like pieces of flesh? The defense submitted it to their own lab. It came back to Kohberger, not the victims. So they went through, tore this thing apart, collected evidence, labeled it, documented it, and then never tested it. And the defense had to send it off and test it. So yeah, I can say that there's absolutely no evidence of anything from the crime in Kohberger's car, and his car wasn't clean because there was evidence from Kohberger living in this freaking thing all over it. So when we look at cars that have fog lamps, they say were his. When we look at this from the processing of his car, then you know the car that Kohberger drove was not the one involved in the crime. That's why I can confidently say the crime happened between 412 and 420. A car was there, was involved. It just wasn't Bryan Kohberger's. So the defense team had their own lab, and the deficiencies of the state investigators tearing apart Kohberger's apartment, his car, finding evidence, testing it to make sure that it was blood, and then choosing not to test it. Can anybody explain that one to me? Why would the investigators go through all the trouble to tear things apart and find evidence, but then not test it to prove the evidence that they found, leaving the defense team to have to send evidence off to a lab to test it themselves? It tells me two things. One, investigators likely knew that that evidence wouldn't come back to the crime. That's why they didn't want to test it. But it also tells me something else. Because the defense team took that same evidence that they refused to test and sent it off to an independent lab for testing, it tells me that the entire defense team that made those decisions also knew that Bryan Kohberger was not guilty of this crime. So when people out there think the defense team was against Bryan Kohberger, I don't know how you can come to that conclusion when they went through and did the extra steps that only people that truly believe Kohberger was innocent would have taken. If you don't think this whole thing has been a plan since day one, I'm not going to be the one that's going to be able to convince you. You go on and pull your pitchforks out against the wrong people that I believe have been fighting for Bryan Kohberger's justice this entire time. Let me know your thoughts, though, in the comments below. And as always, please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Thank you for coming along on this ride with me on this Saturday afternoon investigative special with Pav. And y'all have a great rest of your weekend. Pav's out.